Hi and welcome back. First up, I do appreciate that there's a somewhat inflammatory title on the thumbnail, and I would just like to say that if you're a doctor and you're watching this, almost by definition you do get it, because you're actually interested enough in the subject to be watching this channel. Also, quite clearly, given how many of them I've interviewed, there are some incredible academics, researchers and clinicians in this space doing amazing work, who are huge allies to the community, and as patients we owe them a huge amount. So this video isn't about them, it's more about the system in which the medical establishment functions and the impact that can have on patients seeking care for a novel or relatively novel condition. So let me explain. Imagine that we can put our current understanding of medical science into a spectrum, where that spectrum is made up of 4 boxes. At this end, we have box 1. Inside here, widely accepted medical science. So basically the stuff in textbooks. The next box along is newly published science, frequently in lesser known journals. Then we have our third box, the confusing box, because in here are essentially 2 types of premise. Some of these might go on to be science one day, moving up to the top box, and some of it, in time, might turn out to be total bollocks. And then in our final box we have the unadulterated, indisputable bollocks. Now, different people will have different opinions on what's in those third and fourth boxes especially. So where does homeopathy go, for example? And indeed the size of each of these boxes will vary radically depending on the condition we're talking about. If we're talking about hypertension or diabetes, these first and second boxes are pretty big, and there's not much in the third or fourth. But with long COVID, it's very different. There's almost nothing in the first box, some stuff in the second box filling up drip by drip, but a vast amount in the third box, and quite clearly quite a lot in the fourth box too. Now, if we go back to the perspective of doctors, I would argue that for most of them practicing in primary care, there's a thing that tends to go on where whatever was in box 1 when they did their medical training is more or less what stays in box 1 forever. Now, they may also have some peripheral memory of what was in box 2 perhaps a decade or 2 ago. The issue is that what's inside box 2 or box 3 for any given condition changes over time, and these changes, additions and deletions become too difficult to stay on top of, or indeed differentiate from box 4. So psychologically, the easy thing to do is actually just to simplify the 4 boxes down to 2. You have well-established medical science and bollocks, where everything in what should be in boxes 2, 3 and 4 all gets put into the latter. And for a condition like long COVID, where almost everything exists in those 3 boxes, you can more or less see the problem. Essentially, there's a bit of a comfort zone that's quite easy to fall into, where only well-established medical science constitutes medical science, and anything that exists outside of those much quoted studies in top journals, so anything holistic or wellness, for example, must all be bollocks. And of course, some of it is bollocks, but fundamentally it becomes too difficult to differentiate the stuff that is from the stuff that might be, or the stuff that isn't. And because that landscape is continually shifting, I mean, certainly in the world of long COVID, where we've got new research being published every week, it's simply not possible to stay on top of the state of every box for every condition. And there's a second problem, that even if your particular doctor isn't comfort zoned and actually wants to stay fully up to speed, there's a problem that the rules their practice is bound by might actually just keep them there. Because until we have RCTs for treatments for long COVID published in top journals and then forming major national guidelines, there's actually very little that NHS doctors, for example, can do outside of prescribing treatments for individual symptoms. And this is why most long haulers have seen very little help from their GPs. Now, there are a few private specialists and GPs who are up to speed with the current status of Box 2 and are prepared to treat long COVID patients off-label based on that research. They may also be able to discuss with you the current state of Box 3, what they think might be heading up this way into Box 2 or Box 1 in the future, and what's probably going in the other direction. It's these folk who are likely to be watching this video, and they're the ones I've been talking to at length over the last 5 years. But this box system is both the blessing and curse of evidence-based medicine. It's why we don't try to cure cancer with human sacrifice or pagan ritual. But it's also incredibly slow to respond to new conditions, which is why for the next 5 or 10 years we've got to accept that our box setup for long COVID is going to be very different than it is for hypertension or diabetes. And in fact, we may never get to the level of understanding that we have with those diseases. And if that's the case, don't expect the long COVID care you get from your garden variety GP to match what they might be able to do for your high blood pressure. So that concludes this short discussion of why your doctor might not get it. Don't blame them, blame the system and its extreme difficulty of navigating it with the lack of resource and pressure that doctors these days are under. But on the plus side, of course, some doctors absolutely do get it. And I'm going to be speaking to one of them in a couple of weeks, Dr. Ben Sinclair from Dr. Finlay's clinic, a recovered long hauler himself and someone who's absolutely up to speed on the current status of all of these boxes for long COVID and how they're relevant to treating long haulers, which he's been doing for 5 years. So if you've got any questions you'd like me to ask him, please do chuck them in the comments. And I ought to just say that normal service will shortly be resumed with part 2 of the Everything I've Tried in 5 Years series. And I also need to give a quick shout out for the next members only live Q&A, which will be next Tuesday, 10th of June at 12 PM Eastern Standard Time or 5 PM British Summer Time. Link to join and become a channel member is in the description. So look after yourselves. Until next time.